All right, if I were to ask you to go ahead and name me a company that has made some legendary EQs, one of the first names that might come up to mind is going to be Pultec. And you know what? Rightfully so. They have made some amazing gear in all these years that they've been in business, such as their MEQ-5 and their EQP-1A. But something that you also might remember as well is how expensive these things are. I mean, the cheapest one of these two starts at $3,600 on the date of this recording. But the good news is you don't need to spend that kind of money to get that kind of sound. Because today we're going to be looking at some plugins by a company named NoiseAsh that has made their own recreations of both of these EQs. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. But before we do, like we always do, let's go ahead and first roll that intro. NoiseAsh is a company where we reviewed some of their products before here on this channel. In fact, just recently we put out a video where we went ahead and reviewed their version of the Portico 5033 Neve EQ, or what they call the Neve 533. But they also have another collection called the Pultec collection, which is obviously modeling after the Pultec EQs that are out there. And the one specifically that they went ahead and replicated in their emulations is going to be the MEQ-5 as well as the EQP-1A. So today we're going to go ahead and take a look at that. But before we do that, it's also worth mentioning that they also have a third plugin, which what they call the Heritage Pro. Now, what this is actually combining those two EQs into one single plugin, so that way you don't have to open up two different plugins to be able to manipulate them. Kind of just houses them all together into one singular place, which is quite nice. Because of this, what we're going to do is look strictly at the Pultec Heritage Pro, since we can go ahead and manipulate both of these EQs here in this review. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into Pro Tools and take a listen to what these EQs can do. All right, so I do have the Heritage Pro loaded up, and as you can see, we do have all of our EQs inside of one plugin. You'll actually notice here in the center, what they call the EQ-1A is actually going to be the take on the EQP-1A, and then of course we also have underneath this what they call the EQ-5M, which is of course the MEQ-5. Now, just above this though, we do have another EQ. It's more like filters here, what they call the F3C. We'll also be taking a look at that as well. Now, the first thing I want to go ahead and direct your attention to is here on QClone. You can actually see just by having this plugin loaded up, we're already seeing some difference in coloration into the EQ curve. If I go ahead and bypass this, it's completely flat. Turning it on, again, we see that coloration. So what I want to go ahead and do first is actually bypass the plugin here, and I want to go ahead and take a listen to some drums I have loaded up by themselves, and I'll go ahead and then turn on this EQ to go ahead and listen to what that difference is just by enabling the plugin. Let's go ahead and do that next. All right, so some pretty interesting results. In fact, this is very similar to when someone is mixing, and let's say they want to go ahead and add some additional character or harmonics to their sound. What they'll then do is go ahead and send that sound out into a piece of analog hardware and then return it back without changing any of the parameters. Just doing that alone, again, adds additional harmonics and character to the original sound source, which is perfect. So it is quite interesting to see that we can get a very similar effect, but by only using a plugin. All right, now that we went ahead and do that, let's go ahead and start going over some of the controls and parameters, and we're gonna start from top to bottom. So the first thing we're gonna look at is going to be the first section, which they have labeled as the F3C. All right, so starting with the F3C, we can actually see it's fairly simple and straightforward. We only have three parameters. We do have this bypass switch, which we see it's enabled, but we can toggle it on and off. And then we have our high pass and our low pass filter. On the left is going to be our low pass. And if you can see here, it starts off, but we can then go ahead and start to turn this, and it goes all the way from 50 Hertz all the way up to 2000. So that's quite a lot that you can go ahead and cut out. I don't know if you'll ever need to go ahead and cut out that much information from an audio source, but good to know that you can with this. All right, on the other side, on the other hand, is going to be our high cut. Now it starts on off, but we can go ahead and then roll it starting at 15,000 Hertz and then roll it all the way down to 1.5K. So interesting to see that there. Let's now go ahead and hear what this does to our drums. We'll mess around with both of these parameters. Let's do this. Awesome. Okay, great. So that takes care of the first section. Let's now go ahead and move into the next EQ section, which again is going to be the EQ-1A. Great. So starting from left to right, the first thing you'll see here is that we do have our toggle switch to go ahead and either enable or disable this EQ section here. So as we can see here, it's turning it on and off. All right, great. Now let's go ahead and look at some of these parameters. Now, another thing I'll also say is that if you've never worked with a Pultec style EQ, it can take a minute to kind of wrap your mind around it because it's not so straightforward. Now, what this has is 3 different bands to work with. We have our low band, which involves these 3 different parameters, our middle band, which involves these 3, and then lastly, our high shelf, which is just these 2. So definitely already very different, again, compared to, let's say, a parametric EQ. All right, let's go ahead and first look at this lower band. So for the lower band, let's select a frequency. Let's do 100. We can now go ahead and boost here, as you can see what's happening in Q-clone, but we can also attenuate as well, which is a little bit different, just kind of different to wrap your mind around. But again, just know that's a control and it gives it a little bit of different shape and character. All right, now let's go ahead and look at the next section, which is going to be our middle band. Let's turn that back on. And we do have the ability to go ahead and boost, and we do have our frequency selector. Let's just set this down to 3K. But instead of having an attenuation, we now have this bandwidth parameter, which allows us to go ahead and decide how broad or how narrow we want that band to be. All right, perfect, great. Now time for the last shelf, or the last band, which is going to be our high shelf. Now it's set to 10K, we can leave it there. And as you can see, the only thing I have available to me is just only to attenuate. So it has very specific controls that is going to be different from a standard EQ, but I hope that very easily explained it. Now let's go ahead and take a listen to what this sounds like on some drums after we've made some adjustments. All right, so as you could probably hear, we got a very interesting and unique sound using just these EQ. Now, a couple things I want to mention here. We do have some additional parameters that I want to go ahead and make sure that we cover. First off, we do have this trim knob that allows us to go ahead and adjust the volume of our audio source after we've made changes using this EQ. So I went ahead and turned it down a little bit so that way we weren't clipping the signal. Next, we do have this V bump here. Now, if you're not familiar with what this is, on the original units, they did have this V bump, which did provide an additional 1 dB of gain. I went ahead and turned it off just again to give us a little bit more room between our headroom and the ceiling there. So we went ahead again, disabled that. And lastly, we do have this analog on and off feature. And what this does is very similar to if you ever used a Waves plugin before, it actually introduces a little bit of noise into your signal. And we don't want that, so I went ahead and disabled it. All right, now that we covered the EQ-1A, let's now move over to the EQ-5M. All right, so we finally made it to the last section of this plugin, which is going to be the EQ-5M. Now, this is also a 3-band EQ like we saw before with the EQ-1A, but as you can see, it's vastly different and it does behave differently. So looking here, starting on the left-hand side, we do have what they call the peak section here, which allows us to go ahead and control any of these frequencies from 200 Hertz to 1K. Let's go ahead and set it to 1K. And as we go ahead and turn this knob associated with it, you'll notice here in Q-clone that it's actually boosting with a fairly broad size Q. All right. Next, let's go ahead and look at this middle section that they have labeled as dip. And as the name implies, the only thing we're actually able to do is go ahead and cut here. Now we do also have the ability to go ahead and select our frequencies from all the way from 200 Hertz all the way up to 7K. So nice to know. Let's go ahead and keep that in mind. Lastly, we do have this peak section here all the way on the right-hand side now, which does give us the ability to go ahead and select from 1.5K to 5. If we go ahead and move this knob, you can see we can go ahead and get a boost here. And as we turn this here, one thing I want you to notice, it looks almost as if the Q itself is becoming more and more narrow the higher up the frequency we go. So very interesting behavior there. All right, like what we did before with the other EQ, I want to go ahead and take a listen to what we can do with some drums using only this EQ section. So let's go ahead and check that out next. All right, so now that we had a chance to take a listen to what each one of these EQs sound like separately from one another, I want to go ahead and play for you a piece of audio of what the drums sound like now using all of the EQs together inside of this one plugin. So let's go ahead and now take a listen. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough of NoiseAsh's Pultec collection, which of course is the Heritage Pro, and which also encompasses the EQ-1A and the EQ-5M. Now, I will simply ask before you leave, if you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. I deeply appreciate it. It also helps the channel grow. Also, if you did enjoy this video and you're looking for similar content, again, make sure to check out that review that I did of NoiseAsh's Need 553. Again, their take on the Portico 5033. All right, thanks again so much. I deeply appreciate you staying till the end. And with that being said, happy mixing.